I welcome you to join me for this class on mediumship and specifically about crossing over spirits and what happens or could happen during the whole transition process. As intuitive psychics, healers, seekers in general, spirits could come to you and ask for help of this kind, even if you don't think of yourself as a medium. And I think it is a good conversation to have because honestly, it impacts all of us. It's going to impact us specifically, personally, and then of course it impacts us in our lives as those around us who experience the transition out of physical. Spirit has really been intensely working with me on this topic, like really of late, like this past week. My father just passed away. He passed away last Friday. I'm actually starting in the context of what happened with my dad because I learned so much, and it was just pretty radical, and it's a really great example. All right, so I have to preface this to give you an understanding of how my father passed and what happened with his passing. My father is sorry, not making light of it. My father, and he's eternal, right? We all are. My father was an alcoholic. He actually, I'm not going to go too far into the history, but to give you some context, I'm the youngest of 4.5 sisters, and there's quite a gap in age. So my mother left my father when I was 11. Like, all my sisters were out of the house, and that's when we left. So from age like 13 to 19, I didn't see my father at all. I saw him once when I was 19, and then I didn't see him again until 4 years ago. Seen him twice in the last 4 years. And it was really great because my husband got to meet him right after we got married. My husband and I had been together 9 years before we got married and never met my father. And, big deal because I hadn't seen him in 20 years anyway. So besides the big gap and besides all of the spiritual growth and healing and the fact that I got to go there the last couple of times in the last few years, I had the benefit of really having all of the issues completely healed and sealed up with my dad. And it was interesting because he was, he would call me every now and again. So it was kind of interesting to sort of have him in my life, but he wasn't really in my life either. Fast forward to last Wednesday, and I got the call from my sister, one of my sisters, that Daddy had another stroke and he was in the hospital. And I knew this one was it. I knew this one was it. I immediately started to call on prayer warriors. I sent messages to all of the people I know who are, like I say, prayer warriors or just, incredibly loving, all the light worker friends that I have. I sent them messages and just said, please pray for my father because he, it seems like I know this is his time. And my main concern was that his fear, because I know that he believes he's going to hell. And that was something he always said. And he has a ton of guilt, and I was just concerned about his transition process. I was concerned about him getting stuck when he left his body because he was afraid that the next place he was going was punishment. So this is the wonderful, amazing thing. I immediately opened a channel with my dad and reached out to him. By the way, I live in California and he lives in Texas. So I'm remote to this situation. All of your prayers, as well as the prayers of the others who I reached out to, worked instantly. He was completely covered in prayers and lifted up. I was talking to him. I was counseling with him. I was speaking with him telepathically. I was in the room with him. And just explaining, just helping him. All of your prayers just kept him calm and kept him from tapping in and getting carried away with those beliefs about death and hell and all that stuff. You guys, prayer works. It's, we're going to someday pretty soon, quantum physics is going to show us how prayer works. It already kind of is, because quantum physics shows us that when we place our attention on something, we place our awareness on it, it changes, it expands. So prayer works. Telepathy is something that we all have, we all do, and prayer is a form of telepathy. So that was Wednesday, and then Thursday, at 1:41, I was actually driving, and I knew my father had popped out of his body, and for the last time. He wasn't gone. He physically wasn't expired. He popped out of his body, and he was staying in the room. And again, I was driving, but because I could feel this happen, I reached out to him, and I was counseling him. And I was explaining to him, and actually his mother, who he loved dearly, and his father, who apparently he loved dearly too, I never met him, were there. I could see, I was in the room with them, I could see with my clairvoyance what was happening in the room, and my father was basically, his consciousness was above his body. My father was an amazing animal lover. That's where I get my love for animals. And so there were just throngs and throngs of animals that were there to hold space and to help him to make his transition. And like animals that I forgot about, not really forgot about, that I don't think about very much, that we had as when I was a child, and then also just tons of animals of his that I never knew. And then there was like another relative who was, I think she's like his cousin, but she was actually a spirit guide of mine for a while. She passed away when she was, I think, in her late 20s from some kind of alcohol event. I don't know if it was alcohol poisoning or something traumatic. So she was really there because she's done a lot of work on the other side and is really working as a spirit guide. So that was it. I knew at 1:41 on Thursday, at 1:41 my time, my father popped out of his body for the last time, but he was staying in the room. And my sister called me 2 minutes later. And she called me and I said, did it happen? And she said, no. And I said, well, he just popped out of his body and he's not going back in. And she said, I know, I felt that. That's why I called you. We know that our consciousness can leave our body because we know of experiences that are like out-of-body experiences and astral projection. So my father was basically projected out of his body. He was in the room still. At this time, he thought that he was just kind of high on the drugs and maybe dreaming or something like that, because when I was talking to him, he was saying, oh, baby Trish, you're my angel. Why is Mama here? Meaning his mother. Why is Mama here? Oh, I must be dreaming. And, he said, baby Trish, are you my angel? And I said, yeah, Daddy, I'll be your angel, okay? So if you get nervous, you just come to me. You know how to find me, all right? Just find me, Daddy. The next day was Friday morning, and I was having my morning meditation, and it was like the second that I got in there, my dad was here, and he was like, here, and he was panicked. I was like, oh no, okay, what do I do? Because I promised him I couldn't just send him away, because I promised him I would be his angel. And I'm saying angel, because I don't mean like an actual being of light. I just mean that's my dad's context when he was saying that, like his guardian or his guide. So he was there and he was panicking and he was like, what the fuck, and I was like, okay, Daddy, I know. And so I actually put up a wall of light for a second. I said, just give me a second, because I needed to get some clarity. It's my father and I couldn't send him away. So I put up some light and I just sat with my guides for a second and I just prayed and I just asked to become neutral. I asked to put aside my perspective and anything else that could be in the way of having me just do this work in light. It's a fragile place. So I brought the light back down and I counseled him for a little bit. And I just told him, I said, Daddy, I was explaining to him, like, you're not going to hell. Everyone gets to be healed. You're going to forget about everything. Nanny is real. Nanny is calling. Nanny is his mother's, that's how I referred to his mother. Nanny is there for you. You saw Nanny. She's on the other side now. And so at this time, all of those beings, all those consciousnesses who had been in the room holding space for him and counseling him for his transition, had now rescinded back up to the light. And I was asking, like, what is that about? Asking my guides. And basically, they told me that it was like they were being an anchor for him in the light, and to attract him to it, to bring him to the light. At the same time, it takes a lot of energy for beings who are in the light to bring their density down to closer to our plane, to our astral level. And so they can't really sustain it for that long either. But the intention was really, like, the primary intention was to anchor and bring my father through. So, it was a whole long thing that went on. I was counseling him in all the normal ways that I counsel spirits who need to cross. But I told him I would hold his hand, and so I did. I called, Archangel Azrael was overseeing it, my guides were overseeing it, and my father crossed into the light. And I felt it, and I saw it, and my physicality was utilized in it a little bit, and it was intense. I then spent some time readjusting, like in my meditative state still, and then slowly came out of my meditation. And I heard my phone, as I was coming up for air, basically, I heard my phone have 2 quick messages come in. The different, it was like in the other room, but I heard bing, bing, right back to back. And I thought, I didn't think much of it. Here's the deal. My father his body was not expired yet. This is the part I may not have mentioned. My father dismissed his body. His consciousness left his body it was in the room that day before, but at this time when he crossed over, his body was not expired. His body was still ticking, so to speak. So what was going on then in the hospital room at that time was his wife and my eldest sister they had been keeping him on a ventilator, on life support kind of stuff. So they were keeping him supported because they thought that my sister should come and be there. When I crossed him over, I wasn't expecting to explain that to anyone. I didn't think I was going to share that with anyone. I just thought that was because, I don't know if people need to hear that or what the deal is. I just hadn't made any personal notes of it. 2 hours later, my eldest sister called me and she said, hey, we are 40 minutes away from getting there, but I just wanted to let you know that they took him off the ventilator. So he's just on his own right now. Basically, there's no resuscitation. And as she told me that, I was like, I know that happened completely correlated with when he crossed over. And I wasn't sure if they took him off and then that's when he freaked out, or if he crossed over and then like his wife and the people there could feel that there was no longer any reason to have him on the support. I wasn't sure which one was the catalyst, but I knew that it was correlated, and I had that confirmation from my guides. And so after I hung up with my sister, I kind of like checked in with my guides, and they were like, yeah, tell them about it. And so I texted my sister. I said, hey, actually the one that's a little more, I think is maybe a little more open. I texted her and I said, look, he crossed over this morning, just so you know. And I know that when they took him off the ventilator, it had something to do with crossing over. I know those 2 things are aligned with one another. And so the thing is that since I had received 2 texts, I had a timestamp on when he had crossed over, because otherwise, like I said, I wouldn't have paid any attention to what the timing was on it. So I went and looked at the texts, and I told my sister, so he crossed over 8:30 and 8:45. And so I know the ventilator had something to do with that. My sister texted me back, yes, that's exactly what happened. Next, she checked in with the wife. Well, this is the really cool part I wanted to tell you. So those 2 texts are, one was from Ms. Jessica Potter, and the other one was from another friend of mine named Laura Powers, who is wonderful, amazing, intuitive, psychic, medium, just another one of our light worker sisters. And so they text me about things that I don't remember actually. I know Laura texted me about something else. I think Jessica may have been texting me some support or condolences about my father. Here's the deal that's amazing is that you guys, they didn't know they were texting me to give me a timestamp, but this is what we are when we are tuned in and when we are light workers. We are open vessels for divine. So that means we are always available to be utilized by God, by divine. They didn't consciously know that that's what they were doing, but they were utilized. And I mean, is it surprising that medium Jessica Potter, intuitive medium Jessica Potter, was one of those people being utilized in this process? So isn't that awesome? We're always being used for one another, for the universe, for God, for source energy. Source energy is always using us, and all we have to do is be us. All we have to do is continue to be open, have our light shine. And you have no idea that's why being present is, and that helps us to be in the flow, just to know, oh, I'm running late for this appointment. You did the best you could. There was nothing you did wrong. And maybe you running 10 minutes behind means that someone else didn't run the stoplight. You have no idea how you're being utilized by divine. You have a lot of idea because we get to see it, but you also have no idea sometimes. And you are perfectly in that flow, and you are that perfect piece of the puzzle for all of us. So I just want you guys to know that. How amazing is that? So he crossed over, and it was 6 hours later that his body actually finally expired. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that connection between the consciousness being in the body and the body being alive and all that kind of stuff. But shorthand right now, basically, it's like, imagine if you were driving a car and then you went and put it in park and then you got out of the car but you didn't turn it on, right? It's not going to keep driving it doesn't have a driver in it, but it's going to take some time because the momentum and the fuel and the gas and everything, which amounts to the nervous system and adrenaline and whatever else, I'm not a doctor, all the stuff that goes on in our bodies, it needs to run its course, needs to peter out. What is so interesting, I wanted to share this with you guys because if you have loss, there's a part that I got to experience that most people I think don't get to experience with a significant loss like that. And actually loss isn't really the right word for me because he wasn't a part of my life, really. So normally if your father passes away, if you don't know your father at all, then you're not going to be aware of something happening, maybe, if you're adopted or somehow don't have any connection to him. So I didn't have, the normal things we have is grief, right? Pain, mourning, loss, because this person is in our lives and now they're being physically removed from it. And then you also have some other things that my sisters were experiencing, which is unresolved issues kick up, and then they start to just stir up a bunch of that shadow stuff. So I didn't have any of those things. Those are the headliners, right? When someone is passing away, those are the major things. I wasn't experiencing that. So what I did experience, I didn't expect because I didn't know there was anything to experience. There's still a primordial response to having this person leave the planet physically. So this is what I kept feeling like. I just explained it to my husband first off. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't even put sentences together these few days that he was like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and actually for a couple of days even after he officially passed, his body passed too. I was like telling my husband, I was like, I'm just ungrounded. It's weird. And then I was like, I heard claircognizance has dropped in. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what you are, because an important piece of you, which is, my father, this physical and spiritual and mental, piece of me is being removed from this plane of existence. So literally a piece of me is no longer grounded. It's no longer here on this planet in this way, in the manner that I'm expressed. So it was really funky. It was a strange thing. And like I say, it was just very primal, very primordial. And so that's something that goes on when, I don't know when else it goes on. This is my only experience with this. But I imagine if you lose someone that is that close to you, either physically or even if it's spiritually. So someone else, because spirit doesn't really care if someone is your blood relative or not. And they also don't care if you kick your blood relatives out of your life. Like all those things count. In the spirit recognizes step siblings as siblings. If you get married and then divorced, you're still just married. If you're adopted, that is your family, that's your parents. But then so are the biological parents that you didn't actually grow up with. Like all those relationships count in some way in the universe. That's just how it is.
That was part 1 of Mediumship, the transition process, and my father's passing. Stay tuned to this channel for part 2. I'm Tricia Carr, spiritual teacher, medium, and animal communicator. Thanks for tuning in. I love you, whoever you are.